This is episode number 23, featuring master artist Carol Swinny. Welcome to the PleinAir podcast from PleinAir magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we dive deeply into the world of outdoor painting, called plein air painting. For those of you who don't know, it's a French term. Plein air essentially means outside or out of doors. The French pronounce it plein air, others pronounce it plein air, but no matter how you pronounce it, there's a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. I call it the new golf. And this show is all about the movement, the painters, the collectors, the galleries, and the art. This week's podcast is brought to you by Lilidol Video Productions, which just released 2 new art instruction videos from Chinese master Jove Wang. It's a drawing video and a painting video, and this guy can paint if you like painterly style. His workshops are hard to get into. They're sold out. This is a rare opportunity to study with a Chinese master, and you can rewind and watch it over and over again. You can learn more at lilyartvideo.com. That's L-I-L-I, lilyartvideo.com. It's my desire to see more people fall in love with plein air painting, and you can help by sharing this podcast with your friends on social media or email, and I hope you'll subscribe so it comes to you every week. Just hit the subscribe button. And of course, we'd love for you to go to iTunes and leave a comment about it. And if you have feedback or interview requests, reach me, Eric, at pleinairmagazine.com. Today's interview is brought to you by Fall Color Week, a painting retreat coming up this October. More about that later. Let's get right into our interview with Carol Swinny. Well, today we have one of America's top painters, top landscape painters, and well represented in some of the top galleries in America. Does amazing paintings, and has some pretty interesting things to talk about in terms of painting. Carol Swinny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Eric. I'm happy to be here.
So today, just so we can get a feel for where you are, you're where?
Well, I'm at my family ranch in Casper, Wyoming. It's located sort of in the central part of Wyoming. And I have about 650 acres left of what I've inherited from my mother. And the ranch was started, my grandparents homesteaded and started acquiring land in Wyoming and amassed over 12,000 acres. So my background is on a cattle ranch. I was a real honest to goodness cowgirl and worked cattle and worked with horses for a long time before I quit doing that.
So did you grow up on this ranch, or was it something you visited?
I did. I grew up completely. I was born here, and my brothers and I used all the acres and all the beautiful meadows and the creeks as our playground when we were growing up.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun.
It's pretty rare to find somebody who's actually living on property that they grew up living on.
Yeah, it is rare, and I'm very fortunate. I'm very sentimental about this ranch, and it's the original ranch house. My grandfather and my parents and the ranch hands actually built the house in 1947, and that's the house I'm in. And the only change I've ever done to it is I've done a little bit of work to the main bathroom, and otherwise, if you walked in here, it's exactly as you would have seen it in 1947.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yes, even the same kitchen.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
well, I think that's important, and congratulations for doing that. That's not something that, everybody has that temptation of new and shiny, and it's kind of nice to keep it the way they intended it.
It is. It's nice.
And do you have you created an art studio on the property? Did you use a room that was already existing? Did you paint in the barn? What's the story there?
I have a great old barn that was built in the 30s that my grandparents built that would make a fabulous studio, but I keep it as a horse barn because I pasture about 30-some horses on the different pastures on my ranch. So we have to keep it as a barn. But my studio is in the basement. It's a 2-story house. In the base, it's a full basement, and it was an old bedroom that one of my brothers had when he was growing up. And that is my studio, and it's not got high ceilings, but it's a nice studio. It stays really cool in the summer when I'm here. So I don't get too hot, and the lighting is pretty good, and I can get way far back from my painting, so that's a good thing.
Yeah. And
So I'm lucky.
what's the largest that you typically ever paint?
The largest painting I've ever painted is a 36 by 48, and I've done a few of those, but I haven't done one for probably over 10 years. And that's because one of my favorite knives, it was a big knife, I broke it, and I never found another one I liked like that. So I used the medium size and small knife, and they don't lend themselves as well to bigger strokes. But I would like to do some bigger work, but I need to find a big knife that I like and start working bigger, because a lot of the galleries would like me to paint bigger, and I don't like to paint bigger with the smaller knives.
So you're primarily a palette knife painter. Would you say that characterizes you?
I am 100% a palette knife painter. I really actually don't use brushes at all.
Really?
I quit using, yeah, really. A lot of people are surprised by that because I get so much detail with my knife, and unless you kind of get right up on it, a lot of people know something's different about it, but they don't really know what it is until they really study it. And then unless you really know how a palette knife, the kind of technique you can get with a palette knife, some people really study it and see if there are brush strokes. Because I know I do the same thing. If I see a palette knife painting, I'm always curious to see if they're a purist like me, because I always look, do I see those telltale bristle brush marks somewhere? And I find that most palette knife paintings have some brushwork in them that I see. Occasionally I do see some that don't.
Right. So a lot of painters will kind of lay out their composition, put in some of their mass in some of their areas, and you're doing it all with knife. Mm-hmm. How did the knife thing begin for you? Because you weren't always a palette knife painter.
No, I wasn't at all. In fact, I tried it in college and didn't really care for it because it's a hard tool to master. I kind of came by it accidentally. In 1980, I had seen work by a couple of gentlemen that lived in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and one of them was Bill Freeman, and he was a wonderful painter. He was on several covers of Western Horseman and was carried by Trailside Gallery up in Jackson, and I happened to see his work here at a gallery in Casper, and I always loved his work, and I found out he lived up there and that he sometimes works with students. And so I went up to Jackson and interviewed with him, and he said, yeah, I will help you a lot and mentor you. And when I sat down with him for the first session, he actually painted with a knife. He never even told me he was a knife painter. I just assumed he was a brush painter. That's how little I knew about a palette knife. And then, so I took notes, and then he handed me one of his palette knife paintings, a smaller piece, and just kind of left and said, okay, here's the paint, here's the knives, here's the painting. I want you to copy stroke for stroke as best you can of what I have done here. And that's sort of how he introduced me to just kind of jumping in with both feet and using the knife. And I was already very good at mixing colors, so I don't think he was worried about that. He wanted me to just try to study the strokes and try to copy them. And I did, and I actually did a pretty good job. And from that point on, I just took off with it. And then eventually I did do a little wildlife at the time. He was doing some wildlife, and I would put those in with a brush, but I got to where I enjoyed the knife work so much that I decided not to do any wildlife, and because I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to stop the flow of the knife, and so I just continued on with painting with a knife.
So there are a lot of people listening who probably have never painted with a palette knife and maybe don't even understand it. Can you perhaps explain why it is that speaks to you more than using brushes, or what is it about palette knife painting that really excites you?
The pure color that I get with a knife, and the mixing and all the different ways the color can mix. You can get broken color, you can get variations of color all in one stroke. I love the way the light hits the smooth surface that you can get with a knife as opposed to kind of more of a matte look with a brush. I like that. I like the points. I like the edges. I like that you can paint, for instance, a log, and you can actually get it to look like the texture of a log. You can actually use the knife and the strokes to make it actually look like what you are painting, whether it be a rock or a log or a leaf or water. Especially love the way the knife works in water. You can swirl that tip around and get some little bits of color moving in different ways to actually make it look like moving water. So that has always interested me over brush because of all the different things I can do with a knife tip or the knife edge or really pressing hard or just going over, like putting a bunch of texture down and then coming back over on a wet on wet technique and just letting those little bits of broken color go over the top. So you can see where I'm going here. It's just, there's so many different things I can do with a knife.
So some people who are palette knife painters also use a lot of other objects, squeegees or, anything they find in a hardware store. Do you do that kind of thing as well?
Mm-hmm. No.
Nope,
I have two sizes. I have a lot of those two sizes, different brands, different makes, but they're pretty much the same shape. I don't. I scratch in my signature at the end with a Phillips head screwdriver. So I guess I have some tools I use, but basically I can achieve everything I want with these two knives. One's smaller and one's a little bit bigger. They're both pretty much the same shape. They go to a fairly good point, but with a rounded edge, and then flare out. I have a little trouble finding them anymore. It's kind of hard to find the shape of knives I use, so I'm kind of getting a little concerned. It's a good thing I bought a lot of them back when I was buying them, but it's people that are doing brushwork do use a lot of other tools. And Bill Freeman used to tell me, I don't care what it takes. The goal is to make a really, really good painting, make the best painting you're capable of making. He said, if you have to use a stick or the end of your nose, whatever it takes, make sure that you make it as good as you can make it. And I remember him giving me that advice.
You've never used the end of your nose yet, I suspect, right?
No, I never did do that, although I have had paint on the end of my nose before, I have been told.
Yes. Yeah, that happens. So I'm just going to delve into this palette knife thing a little bit more because it's fascinating to me. I use a palette knife to mix a little color, and once in a while I'll lay in an edge, but I don't do much else with it. And I'm really fascinated. First off, what makes a great knife versus a crummy knife?
Well, I don't ever order my knives. It has to do with the flexibility and the stiffness of a knife. And some have a little more of a blunt tip and some have a little bit more of a point. Also, from years and years of use, some of them can get a really sharp edge, a side edge to them from me just constantly scraping the paint off on my glass palette. By the way, you do need to use a glass palette over any other kind of surface because the knife tends to stick against plastic or masonite or whatever. So I always recommend that you have a glass palette that you mix your paint on. And I carry one with me, so my stuff's a little heavier because of the glass palette. But anyway, knives, I like to try them. So I don't order them anywhere. I just kind of look for them whenever I'm somewhere in an art store. I'll just kind of check and see if they have knives, and if they have one in the shape I like, I'll check it. And if it has the right kind of flexibility, a good spring to it, then I'll get it. One thing I don't like is a knife that's too stiff, because it won't have the flexibility to do the kind of techniques that I like.
All right. So what's the way that one learns to manipulate paint with a knife properly? Is there when you're teaching, is there a particular guidance that you give people? I taught workshops for about 6 or 7 years, and then I quit about 10 years ago. Only because there's so few people that do paint strictly with a knife and I hate not teaching because I know there are people that do want to learn,
but it was so hard to go around 10 times with people that couldn't paint with a knife, and they would just kind of be lost, and it was just a little too tiring for me to do it, and I ended up painting about 2/3 of everybody's painting for them, and that was just too much to do. But when I was teaching them, pretty much I would demo on either their canvas or on my own, and I would just show them, have them stand around me really close and really kind of look and see how I was maneuvering the knife. And then, I tried so many different methods, like, okay, let's everybody do a log, and everybody was working on the same thing at the same time, so I could demo that, because it was really hard for them to grasp the technique. They could grasp the composition and maybe mixing the color, but the technique is the hardest thing to teach them. So my advice to anybody that would like to paint with a palette knife is just to practice, not try to enter a show with your painting. Just keep practicing with that knife until you finally, it takes hours and hours and hours and hours and paintings, a lot of paintings, to finally get it control. It's all about control. How hard should you press? How light should you press? How should you twirl the knife here? Should you just use the edge here, the tip? Because I use absolutely every surface, front, back, side, tip, to do the different things I'm doing. And it's really just putting the paint on there. Don't worry about mixing it even sometimes, just putting the paint on there and getting used to all those maneuvers that you have to teach your hand and your arm and your eye and everything how to do that.
Are you painting on a hard surface like a panel? Are you painting on canvas? It does depend on
Actually,
if you're studio or plein air.
Only paint on stretched canvas. I recommend that to anybody, that it is way, way easier if you use a very tightly stretched canvas, because if you have a hard surface, you don't have any spring. It's like, I like it like a little drum, because if you have a spring and you push in with your knife, you can get some amazing, just the feel of it. If you're pushing against something hard that does not give back, you're going to have a harder time getting the lightness of the technique that you need to have. So I always recommend that people just practice with stretched canvas.
So do you have a problem with thick paint cracking over time? Do you put anything into the paint?
Okay, that is a very good question.
Thank you.
And I don't really have a good answer. That is a super good question. Because yes, it is an issue. And I think it's even an issue for those brush painters that paint with a very thick impasto technique. Whenever you have two different drying, you kind of have the underside that might be drying slower than the outer edge. It can be a problem, and especially in a sky area where I have a smoother surface. Like if I'm painting just a blue sky with no clouds, and after time, I have seen some of my paintings that I did like 15, 20 years ago, that the skies has cracked. Or if I had a smooth area in the painting, it's usually with a lighter color, and it might be because they take a lot longer to dry. So the outer surface has dried and the undersurface took longer to dry. And then when it gets into a temperature change, the painting after it's completely dry, then it tends to sometimes crack. But then I've seen paintings I've done 30 years ago that didn't crack at all. And I cannot figure out why some do and some don't. And Bill Freeman himself had the same issue, and he would get so frustrated with seeing some of his paintings that had cracked in the sky, especially, whereas some would never crack and some would crack. So I just can't totally answer that, and I don't know the solution.
Well,
I wish somebody would figure that one out.
Somebody out there will be able to tell us the answer, I'm sure. Probably somebody from one of the paint companies would be listening. And so is your paint relatively thick when you lay it on with a palette knife? Or are you trying to keep it as thin as possible? What's your philosophy there?
Well, my skies are thin, pretty thin. Even if when I put clouds on, I try not to have them thick. I did start that way when I was first learning from Bill, because his were thicker. But as I've gone along over the years, I've made my skies and my clouds thinner. because I'm hoping that they will dry in a more uniform manner and do a little less cracking. That's number one. Also, I like my skies to be skies and not have texture, because if you look up at the sky, it's not like you see lines of texture in them. So I like them to be a smoother sky. But my paint is laid on pretty thick especially in my foreground, that's the thickest. Basically, I start at the furthest back and then I work my way forward. I do not block anything in. There's nothing blocked in, because like brush artists usually do. I get it completely done. The sky's completely done. Then the distant mountains are completely finished. Then the foothills are finished. Then the trees are finished. And then I work on the foreground. So I work from the furthest back to the foreground, because then I can always be laying in to the wet paint as I'm moving forward. Because if I tried to lay in the foreground and then try to work around all those thick painting edges, I wouldn't be able to keep going back. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so there's no formula of putting your darks in first or your lights in first or anything like that?
No. There is a little, I do some of that when I'm working in like one area. Like say I'm just working in the foreground, and like say I'm trying to get some highlights on a mass of trees. I'll go in and put I might go in with the light first and then work the dark into that, and then leave the edges kind of light. But it's basically, it's just layering. And if I don't get it all right that way, then I have to go back in and add some lights in some other areas. But the good thing about a knife is I can go back in and scrape out on a whole section in just like a split second. And then I have a really nice little underpainting there. And then I can go back in and add some light or add some dark to that. So that's kind of a nice feature. You don't have to get the turpentine out and the rag out
Right.
and take out a whole section. You can just scrape out what you need. And also with the thick paint, another advantage is if I get I'm pretty far done and I'm going back and kind of cleaning the painting up and just making it all make sense, I can I can take from some thick areas and I don't have to remix something. I might be able to take it from somewhere else and stick it where I need it and not have to remix, because I have so much paint up there you can't even tell. I've actually dropped paintings upside down onto carpet, lifted them straight up, and you can't even tell anything happened. It's because there are points there anyway. There's just a few more now.
That's right. So how did you make this transition from being a girl working on a farm, or raised on a farm, probably working on the farm?
Ranch. It's a big difference from
Yeah, you're right.
It's Black Angus cows, Black Angus cattle. That's what we had. No farm animals whatsoever.
So cattle are not a farm animal. Horses are not a farm animal. Chickens are a farm animal.
They are not. They're a ranch animal.
All right. Good to know.
Yeah.
That just shows that I don't know much about ranches. How did you make the transition to artist? How did that all come about?
Well, I wanted to be an artist since as far back as I remember. When I was a little tiny girl, my mom said that's all I did pretty much, besides the horse thing and playing with my plastic horses. The rest of the time I was drawing and painting, and I've got she kept all that stuff, so I've got a lot of it to look at if I want to look at it. It's something I wanted to do, and I never wanted to do anything else my entire life. I majored in art at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, and didn't get a degree. I got married, but I did go 2 years, and I had that. But I wasn't ever concerned about getting a degree, because I knew I wanted to do exactly what I'm doing, be a fine artist, a painter. The only thing that changed was I originally wanted to be a contemporary Western artist. I wanted to do the contemporary cowboy and cowgirl kind of scenes, ranch scenes, because of my background. But when I met Bill Freeman and Greg McCurran, who was my other mentor, and he was a brush artist, so I had a lot of influence from him also. But the technique I stayed with was all as a result of Bill Freeman. But once I started painting with those two guys, and they both did some wildlife, I changed over to wildlife, and I actually did nothing but wildlife paintings for about 7 years. And it was where I was doing the brush and palette knife combination during that period. And then I eventually gave up the wildlife because I didn't want to use the brush. And I went completely to palette knife approximately 20 years ago. And I've been all palette knife for about 20 years now.
So other than those two guys, what artists or paintings inspired you?
Well, some of my favorite painters, of course, I love the California Impressionists. They're wonderful. Edgar Payne, and Bischoff, and several others I admire a great deal. There are some fabulous wildlife artists, like Bob Kuhn is my all-time favorite. He's one of my favorite artists of all types, and I was a friend of Bob's when I moved to Tucson 11 years ago. I got to know him really well. And for your listeners, I do live in Tucson, Arizona, actually more than I live on my ranch in Wyoming. I'm actually there 7 months out of the year, and I'm actually in Wyoming 5 months out of the year. And I have a big studio there also. So I paint a lot of the desert.
And is that because you want to get out of the cold?
Yes, exactly. I'll tell you, Casper is about 62,000 people, and it hasn't grown a whole lot because the wind blows a lot here in the winter, and it's really cold, and it gets a lot of snow. And I think that's what keeps people from moving to it, because it's one of the most gorgeous places. It's got a beautiful mountain here, and it's really a wonderful city, but it's just in the wintertime, it's just nasty. Yeah, and I've always had a fascination for Arizona since I was a little girl. My grandparents had a place in Phoenix, and I had to have a place in Arizona. And I love Tucson. It's a great place. And as you know, Tucson is a great place because we just had a lot of fun there last April.
Yes. Yeah, we did, didn't we? It was,
yeah.
It's a beautiful place to paint. And I had never painted there before. And I'd like to spend several months getting used to it because it's so beautiful.
Well, if you come down there, I have 3 guest bedrooms. You're welcome to stay.
Okay, well, don't say that too loud because there's about 48,000 people listening to this right now. You may have a continuous bed and breakfast going if you're not careful.
Oh, well, it's almost that way now. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious about if you kind of transitioned from brush to palette knife. Do you think that you're going to stick with this? Or are you going to try any other experimental things in the future?
Well, that's a good question, because I have been thinking for probably 10 years now about an experimental type of painting I would like to do. I will never quit palette knife because I love it so much, and I feel like I have such a good handle on it. But I would like to experiment with some bigger work with palette knife, but I am going to have to find the right knife, which that's still a challenge for me.
It's got to be a big one, right?
Yeah, bigger paintings, more like the, I would say 24 by 30 on up to, possibly 40 by 40, kind of somewhere in that neighborhood. But I would like to do some brushwork on there, because I think when I go to bigger, it would make sense to be able to block in a little bit of the paint with brush, because otherwise it's pretty time consuming to cover some large areas with knife. Louisa McElwain, as you know, she was an amazing painter with a larger spatula type of a tool. I watched her paint one time, and it was fascinating to watch her. She could really put the paint on fast. She wasn't detailed like me, but she was really talented with her compositions and her colors, and I admired her for that.
Well, and if you didn't do it, if you did it all paint, you'd have to bring a crane in to lift it because it'd be so heavy.
I know. People have oftentimes watched me at demos and say, "Do you sell those by the pound because you have a lot of paint on there?" But yeah, they do. It does get pretty thick. It does, and it takes about 6 months for that paint to dry too, completely dry.
Well, that's got to be hard for you, because so if you're doing a show or something, you have to really work far in advance, don't you?
Well, I do, but I also don't have any qualms about putting paintings in wet because I guess that's because I've gotten used to doing that because I've done plein air. I've done plein air since I met Greg McCurran and Bill Freeman because we never did painted in the studio. I mean, we finished up in the studio, but every single painting I did with those guys, and I painted with them for over 30 years, each of them. We did them outside. We started them outside and we painted predominantly outside. Sometimes we'd go back again to the same location, but we would always go back to the studio and look at the painting and see what it needed to have changed to make it into the best painting we could make it into. So sometimes alla prima was happening, but most of the time you get most of your information down on location, and then you go back and you look at it and you say, oh, that doesn't make sense there. I need to change that, or the composition isn't working here. So you change it and you change. So I'm pretty good at being able to paint, just look at a painting and finish it from my memory and from my knowledge of what makes a good composition.
How much do you go out plein air now?
Probably about half the paintings I do every year plein air or started plein air, and the other half are completely studio work from my reference material. I think I've been about that kind of ratio now for probably about 10 years.
So since I teach marketing to artists, I always like to find out how one's career came about. Some people have been very fortunate and things just kind of happened for them, and others have been have orchestrated it a little bit. What happened to you? How did your career come about? How did you start getting to the point where you were invited into the right galleries and selling art? What was that like?
Oh yeah, that's a good question too. My career really changed for the better and much more exposure and all that when I met Greg and Bill, because I actually interviewed with them both the same summer in 1980, and they both said yes, you can study with me, and that they changed my life. If I hadn't have met them and had them be such good friends and work with me so much, I really have no idea where my career would have gone. It's so interesting how life works in that way. That why in the road and which why are you going to take is really amazing. When you go back in your life and you see some major why that you hit and did what you took, the side the road that you took. And in that case, I think I still would have painted, but I just have no idea what I would have done if I hadn't have met those guys, because they took me into a very professional direction, and they both had so much to give me and so much advice, especially Greg on business advice. He was amazing. And they introduced me to gallery owners. They introduced me to a whole world out there because they were both very professional, and they, neither one of them did a lot of advertising, but they were in good galleries, very well respected galleries like trailside galleries and that kind of thing. Even though I never went with Legacy or Trailside, I did talk to both those people, but it was so early in my career I wasn't far enough along for them. But actually, Greg McCurran is the whole reason I'm with a fabulous gallery in Jackson Hole, Wyoming called Astoria Fine Art.
Right.
Greg had been showing at John D. Tomaso's gallery there in Jackson Hole, and Greg was the director in the gallery, and I had met him through Greg. And so when Greg opened his own gallery and on the square, Greg called me right away. Greg McCurran called me right away and said, Greg Fulton is opening this gallery. So I called him and he said, yes, I'm very interested in handling your work. And that has been my best gallery, and I've been with them 10 years now. And I also was in some good galleries in Scottsdale, down in Tubac, a real good gallery down there, K. Newby Gallery. And then now my most recent gallery that picked me up when my Scottsdale gallery closed is with John Marzoff with Broadmoor Galleries at the famous Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I just delivered 2 paintings to him this last weekend. And they've been doing pretty well for me. So And I've been in some other galleries in Santa Fe and some good galleries there. But I was in a fabulous gallery out in California. That one probably was very. I went out to the fall. I guess they call it the Carmel Arts Festival. It's still going on, and it's been going on for probably about 20 years now. But I went out there and was sponsored by a friend that was working in a gallery that became Trailside Galleries there briefly. And I got asked by three galleries at that time to be in their galleries because they were impressed with what I did out there. And it was the first time I had ever painted the ocean, but because the palette knife lends itself so well to water and water that's swirling around, it really worked for me, and I did extremely well there for 11 years in a row in galleries in Carmel, California. I don't show in California anymore. I haven't for about 9 or 10 years now, but those 11 years were very important for my advancement in my career, because I met a lot of the right people and they saw my work. And Rob Pitzer with Pictures of Carmel out there was very instrumental in promoting me and giving me really, really good advice. He was a great guy and
Then
a great
he moved
gallery
to Texas, didn't he?
He moved to Texas. In fact, I went with him to Texas also for several years. I eventually pulled out of there because I decided I just didn't want to have a gallery in a state that I just couldn't go see. I like to be more of a participant in my gallery. I like to be able to go there and do demos and go back and forth and change out paintings. And it was just too far away for me.
Yeah.
But Rob and Linda were great people, and I'm still friends of theirs.
So you have you're juggling a lot. Sounds like running a ranch isn't exactly easy. What all are you doing besides painting?
Well, the good thing about the ranch thing is I have a ranch manager that takes care of a lot of the ranch kind of maintenance and road work and that kind of thing. And then I also have a full-time personal assistant that lives here at my house in Casper. And so she does some things. She doesn't do anything with my art career, though. She does nothing with that except deposit checks, which is important. But she sends me my mail down to, in Tucson when I'm gone in the winters and that kind of thing. So that it helps to have somebody do that kind of thing for you. But as far as my art career, I've never had anybody to like an agent or anything like that. I've always done it myself, and I've always believed in the power of advertising. I believe strongly, and still tell new artists that I think it's very important to get your name out there and have your name associated with your best work by advertising. I think that's an important thing to do. When I first started advertising, my first few years, I was putting like up to $25,000 to $30,000 a year into my advertising budget, which is a lot. And now I don't. It's consistently less than $10,000 because I don't need to do as much of it now. And that with the economy, it's a little harder to do a lot of advertising unless you're making well over into the six figures. You probably need to budget how much you're going to put on advertising, but I really think it's very important. And so did Rob Pitzer. He told me that same thing. So it was good back then to have a gallery during the heyday of galleries, to have a gallery that was willing to put a little bit of time and effort into having one of their new artists be promoted in their gallery.
So tell me a little bit about, you say you're not taking on any students anymore, is that right?
That is correct.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to make a career out of painting? Maybe they're early stage, or maybe they're not, but they kind of want to build. Do you have any specifics that you'd like to share with somebody?
Well, advertising is number one. I think they need to do some homework and I think in your boot camps, I mean, you have it figured out, Eric. I mean, you know everything they need to be doing. They need to figure out which galleries are the right fit for them if they're interested in trying to find a gallery representation. And then they need to find out how to approach the gallery, because so many galleries are approached by, there's so many artists out there nowadays that want to get into a gallery. I hear it a lot, even artists that are used to get into galleries, and then they kind of stop for a while, and now they want to try to get back into a gallery, and they're finding it to be a whole nother ballgame nowadays. It's very different.
Well,
And
I
it's
think
hard.
to that point, one of the things that I've noticed is that there are a lot of people who built their names and became prominent artists in their time, and then they stopped, and they just assumed that everything would continue, and as a result, they're now having trouble getting into certain galleries because the galleries don't know who they are, or
You are
because
so right.
they have
So
not
correct.
created the demand by keeping their name alive in the world of collectors, because this churns and changes. Somebody who, let's say a gallery loses 20% of their customers every year because they run out of painting space. They aren't collecting anymore. Their financial circumstances have changed, a number of different things. So they have to be constantly themselves rebuilding and adding 20% a year or 10% a year just to make sure that they're staying equal. Well, the same thing happens to artists. There are people who collect those artists, but they die off, they change, they run out of space. And so you have to be constantly keeping that name out there so that new collector will know who you are. And a lot of people out there assume that everybody knows who they are because they were famous 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I've met numerous artists who are having those problems today, and they're not looking back at the fact that, they probably need to be focusing on keeping their names visible.
That's so correct. It's you really hit the nail on the head on that one, Eric. I have this conversation a lot with I have a large group, obviously, of artist friends, and we're always talking about the same issue. And, it's like me, I've been painting now professionally for about 35 years. I would really like to take a year off and just do experimental paintings. And I'm going, gee, can I afford to not accept these museum invitations or these plein air shows or do this or that? Can I afford to even be gone 1 year? Because I really worry that if you jump off the merry-go-round for 1 year, it's hard to even get back on and have people still remember you after a year, because there's so much going on. As you said, it's like a churning tide pool, or a sea. It just churns all the time. And if you don't constantly go to those shows and make your artwork visible and advertise and do things and network with your artist friends and network with things that you find new collectors at, what are you going to do? You might be forgotten in the span of a year.
Well,
People like Bob Kuhn will never be forgotten, or some of the huge names like Howard Turpney. They have that luxury, but I would say 90% of the artists don't have that luxury.
Well, that's right. One of the gallery owners on stage at the convention said that very thing. It says, if you're out of sight and out of mind for a year, it makes it much more difficult to sell your work. So I guess the way you have to do that is to have that assistant of yours send paintings to the galleries and get on, put a wig on and go to the shows and pretend to be you. And
I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
I need to clone. I need about 1 or 2 clones.
Yeah, well, if you figure out how to do that, I would like that too. So
Okay, I'll let you know.
To kind of wrap this up, is there one particular painting, if you could own any painting in the world other than paintings from your 2 mentors and from yourself, if you could own one painting of anybody in the world, is there one that you would just instantly gravitate to?
Bob Kuhn.
Yeah.
Yep, he's my idol.
Didn't
I
take you long
just
to figure that one out.
think his work is just amazing. It would probably be a red fox, one of his famous red fox paintings. In fact, I just had a birthday, Eric, about 2 weeks ago, and one of my birthday presents from another fabulous artist that does animal portraits, and her name is Sarah Weber. And she lives in Jackson in the summers and Tucson in the winters. And I've known her for about 25 years, and I met her through Bill Freeman, of all things. But she gave me a book that just came out about paintings of a red fox, just that subject matter alone. And this book is like 2 inches thick. And on the cover is the most incredible painting of a red fox that Bob Kuhn painted. And he painted a lot of them. And when you look at this book, it boggles the mind on how many famous artists have used the red fox as a subject matter in a painting. But that's what I'd want. It's one of his.
All right. Well, maybe
In fact, I did commission him. I have to tell you this. About 2 years before he passed away, I commissioned him to do a red fox for me, and he was going to do one, a small painting. But unfortunately, he was starting to fail a couple of years before he passed away. His heart was not good, and he just couldn't get to it, and I never got it. But maybe someday I'll go to an auction and get lucky.
Yeah, we all have those dreams of finding that undiscovered painting that is not selling in the auction for some reason. Well, let me ask you this. So this is always the final question, and that is that you have, it's your final day on Earth. You have your friends, your family gathered around you. All of your paintings have disappeared. There's no evidence of your teaching, but you're allowed to whisper or write 2 or 3 truths to your friends and family. They can be about painting, they can be about life, they could be about anything. What would you say your truths would be?
Never give up on a dream. And never give up on something that really makes you passionate. Number 2 is do not be afraid of hard work in order to achieve your dreams, because it's going to take a lot of hard work and attention to detail. That's important too. In all aspects of life, I think. Do go the little extra mile, that little extra thing that you can do, whether it be a painting, something you're writing, something you're doing for somebody. But if you can just do that one little extra thing that shows that you put a little bit more than just the minimum in, I think it will go a long way in making your life meaningful, and it will mean something to the other people in your life too.
Well, Carol Swinny, thank you so much for your time today and the inspiration and teaching us all about palette knife painting. I'm getting excited now. I'm going to go do one tonight.
Oh, good. I'm really glad. Make sure you email me a picture of it when you get done.
I'm not so sure I'm willing to do that. Maybe I should practice a little first.
Okay, well, you practice, and it was really wonderful to visit with you, and thanks so much for including me in your fantastic podcasts.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Carol Swinny. This interview was sponsored by Lil et al. Video Productions, which just released 2 new art instruction videos from Chinese master Zhou Wang, a drawing video and a painting video. His drawing skill is absolutely amazing, and to learn it, what a gift, what a gift. His workshops are hard to get into and sold out most of the time. This is a rare opportunity, his first video. You can learn more at liliartvideo.com, L-I-L-I, artvideo.com. It's also brought to you by an event that I do called Fall Color Week. It's my publisher's invitational event in the fall. Coming up this October, all we do is paint, and there's still time for you to get in. What you do is you come up, you roll out of bed, we serve you breakfast, we make you a sack lunch, we paint all day in Acadia National Park, then we serve dinner, and then we play music, sit up and talk, and reconnect with our friends and show our paintings for the day. And then at the end of the week, we pull all our paintings out, look at all of our paintings. There are probably close to 1,000 of them because there's 100 of us. And we have a fabulous lobster dinner that has been caught that day. We even bring the fisherman in to tell us about his catch. It's a week of painting, which is great for those of us who want to just paint with friends, focus on getting better. There's no workshops, no stars. We are all equals, no matter what our painting skill, whether it's good or not, it doesn't matter. It is a blast. And at this recording, there are a few seats left of our 100 seats available, but not very many. Visit fallcolorweek.com. It is peak season. We always pick peak season. So the colors are at their peak. And we're right there on the ocean, and you got these big rocks with the crashing waves. It's just beautiful. We had a really great time last year, our first time. Remember, the plein air movement is hot, 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 which may be why Plein Air Magazine is the top representational art magazine nationwide at Barnes & Noble stores. So pick one up and get a bi-monthly subscription for about half the price if you wish at PleinAirMagazine.com. Well, this has been fun. Let's do it again sometime, like next week, when we talk to master artist John Budison. He tells us a lot of pretty interesting things.
You take a sunset, an example, and, you see that last light, and you see all these colors that a lot of people painted, and they're very, very garish. But if you really study the sunset or any landscape, you'll find a lot of harmony in there. And subtlety in the colors that I think it's just a matter of learning to see, listen, and most of all, I think, is feel the color.
I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. Remember, it is a big, beautiful world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.